Great. All right. Well, thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Altine. Thank everybody. Thanks to everyone who took the time to come tonight, and then those who are going to watch this later. For those who don't know, I'm Jason Breyer. I'm an assistant professor in the program. I teach mostly in the graduate program, in the data science program, but I'm excited to talk to some of the undergrad students, and I think there hopefully will be some broad interests and applicability to this talk. So what I'm going to talk about is building a portfolio and sort of a personal website. So I love a lot of the stuff Wendy was talking about in terms of a CV, and I think one of the great things you can do about with your CV, particularly in an IT field or technical field, is to actually have your own personal website. For a lot of reasons, like a lot of employers might Google your name, and if you have your own website up, and that's the first thing they find, I think that creates a great appearance. So there's gonna be a little bit technical, but hope we're all IT or technical people, so hopefully you could take this later as step-by-step guide. I'm gonna go through things kind of somewhat quickly, and just to kind of outline the process that you're gonna do to build this. The tools I'm using are all completely free, and we're gonna see. So to start, up front, I want to kind of talk about, like, broadly speaking, there's kind of two types of websites. We could have static websites or dynamic websites. What I'm going to show here tonight are static websites, and there's a lot of great advantages. One is, they tend to be much faster for people when they're viewing them. And since you're probably not going to change your website very frequently, it's a great way to kind of save space. And then we can leverage things like GitHub and specifically GitHub Pages to host these for absolutely nothing. So that's going to be a great way. Dynamic websites would be things like you may have heard of, like WordPress, which is a common blogging platform. The notion is every time somebody visits your page, you're going to hit some database, you're running some dynamic code. That takes time, that takes overhead, and that usually equates to expenses. So we're trying to keep things cheap and streamlined here. And I think this is a great way to do it. There are actually quite a number of frameworks for creating static websites. So Hugo is one I've been using for quite a lot. So right now, currently, if you will, my personal website, like my portfolio site, is in Hugo. I do believe I'm in the process of switching it over to what I'm going to show tonight. But it's a very popular approach, and there's lots of free themes. It's maybe a little bit more mature because it's been around for many, many years. And I have some other examples that I put here. Another one that's kind of popular that I haven't used quite a lot, but I thought it was worth mentioning is Jekyll, because if you just start at GitHub Pages and follow their directions, Jekyll is sort of their default framework. It's a lot like Hugo as well, but I just don't have a lot of experience, but there are a lot of themes. What I'm going to show tonight is Quarto, because I think it's really easy to use. And for some, I know there's some data scientist students here. We're going to hopefully have an undergraduate program starting very soon. But it's very oriented towards programmer. Okay, so it allows you to highlight other languages really, really nicely. So if you have Python code or R code or SQL code, there are ways of putting it into the pages or into your website where it'll even do nice code highlighting like you would see in an IDE. And I have some examples, like my course websites are all built using Quarto and building a site, but we'll see what we'll build one tonight. I need to take a small digression. So one of the things about actually all three of these frameworks is that you're actually going to be creating your content in what's called Markdown. So if you haven't encountered Markdown before, it is really just a plain text format. It was originally created by John Gruber, who was he's a pretty well-known Mac blogger. And his goal was he wanted to be able to write these articles in a way that looks great just in a plain text file, and then the styling in terms of what things are going to look like should be handled by Cascade style sheets and whatever the engine is that's going to build the website, right? So he's like, when I'm writing, I want to focus on content, and design can be handled by another layer and a kind of translation layer. I have a couple of links to some guides. There are extensions to Markdown to then embed actual code that can be executable, whether it's R or Python. So that's a really great way to kind of demonstrate, code snippets, and you can see the input and output will kind of get all combined together into the resulting page. So here on this little screenshot that I pulled, um, so you can see this is the markdown source. So it's just really text, and if you want headers, all you do is you put a pound sign in front of it, and you can have one, two, three, four, or five headers, and that would be equivalent to header one, two, three, four, or five. If you've done HTML, that often just translates to like H1, H2, those kind of header tags. Um, if you want things on italics, you just surround the word or phrase in a single asterisk. If you want it bold, you use two asterisks. You can just create bullets as you want. And this one right here, what you might not be able to see, this is like the accent aigu or the tick mark. It's in the upper left-hand corner of your keyboard. So if you just surround code or text in that block, it's actually going to print like code, right? So if you want to demonstrate some program you wrote, you can do that. So, anyways, I'm not going to talk a lot. You're going to see some examples, and I'm going to give you a place to start. And so I think it's pretty straightforward, and there's some guides here. I kind of alluded to this notion um, that you can kind of embed programming code, Python, R, what have you, within your text. So you can write some text, put some code, and then you can have the code and the output, or maybe just the output, or maybe just the code. There's a lot of different combinations you can do. Um, I just I'm an educator, so I like to talk about history sometimes a little bit. So this notion was actually introduced by Donald Knuth in 1984. He called this literate program, and he had this notion that programs should be kind of written in sort of plain language, right? It's a little bit more than if you've done any programming in your already in your coursework, right? It's generally a good idea to have comments, right? I always say that I try to write good comments, not for me, but for future me. So when I come back and look at something, I know why or what I'm doing. Um, but Donald Knuth kind of said it should go even further, right? You should be pretty verbose, right? And so this has been a really dominant idea, I think, in the data science world in particular. I think computer scientists more broadly could benefit from this approach. But in terms of like Markdown in the Quarto world, right? These are the tick marks, and so that just tells the engine when it's building your website that, okay, here comes some code, and you first parameter is the language. So I would just put R or Python or SQL or Julia or whatever you're using. And then there's a whole bunch of options. And then that code could be executed or not executed if you want. So there's like a whole bunch of options. I'm not going to go into a lot of great detail. But there's some links here if you want to explore a little bit more. So like there's something called eval. So if you just want to show your source code, but don't actually want it to execute when your website's built, so you just say eval equals false, right? Um, if you only want to show the output, but not the actual code, you could say, okay, echo equals false. It won't show the code. And if you generate a figure or a table or whatever might happen, it's just going to kind of be there. So a little bit of digression. I think this kind of framework, you could start simple and then you can kind of build up. So great. So there's some background information in terms of like building a static website. So what do we do? So well, obviously the first thing you need to do is install Quarto. So you can go to the Quarto website and download it, and I'll have a link on the website for you to do that. Once you do that, you can run this command in the terminal. So if you're on Mac or Linux, bring up your terminal command, and you can type these things, create a folder, move to that folder and go there. If you're in Windows, you're just going to use the DOS command, right? You can run these as DOS commands, or if you're one of the more newer Windows versions, I think there's a full class Unix command available to you. Right, so Quarto is going to be our main command. You can kind of do this, or honestly, the other thing you can do is just clone. So if you have Git installed, you can do that. Or in this tab, here's a repo that I'm going to suggest that you could use, and I'll show a little bit of this. You can go right in here, and you can clone it, or you can download this whole repository, and you're going to have a starting website. This is often how what I might recommend is just download this. Find my name, change it to your name. Find my picture, change it to your picture, right? That kind of stuff. So the basic structure will be there. If you're using VS Code, There are instructions at this link. So if you follow this link, it'll give you step by step. I think VS Code is one of the more popular IDEs right now. Or I'm a data scientist, so I use RStudio. In RStudio, I can just go create a new project. I would say new directory, and I have a Quarto website as an option, and it's going to create the whole structure. I give it a little bit of name. The key bit here for now is I want to say I want to initialize a Git repository, right? Because that's how we're actually going to end up publishing this website. So if you do that, you can immediately call Quarto Preview, or you can call Quarto Render, and that's just going to render the entire site. So I will throw some links in the chat at the end, but this is the site that I built so far, right? So I have only had just a couple of pages, and let me show you. Actually, I think I have. Okay, yeah, let's start here. So the first file that you might want to start playing with is this underscore quarto.yml. So YML stands for yet another markup language. So you're going to have to learn Markdown. You have to learn, YAML, which is really just a set of parameters. And there are a lot of things you can put in here, right? But for us, right, we have a project. It's a website. Um, we are going to render QMD files. So some of this you can just keep as yourself. But here's where you're going to want to change some stuff, right? You can change the title to your name. The site URL, I'll show you where you're going to get that. That's going to be where it's published, a description. I can define the pages that I want available in my nav bar, right? So there's not a whole lot here, but enough that hopefully it's pretty straightforward that you can start tweaking this for your own needs. Okay, so here's the main homepage. So at a minimum, I bet you if you sat down and set aside about an hour, you can at least get one page like this that has like your picture, your name. I have some links, right? So we could see I have my LinkedIn, Mastodon, GitHub, emails, and a PDF of my CV. I have a little description about myself. I have my education. I just put some selected projects just to do this kind of rather quickly. So to build that page is each of these pages, which are QMD files, so that stands for Quarto Markdown file. So what makes it a little bit different is this part right here at the top. So I have 3 dashes and I ended by 3 dashes. So this is kind of like metadata, if you will. So and a lot of this I hope is pretty self-explanatory. So I have a title, and this is telling Quarto that, oh, I want the about page format. And so with the about page, there's some template I put in here for you. So there's a couple of different options. So what I always recommend is like I ended up on trestles, but just change the value to each one. You can click render in your IDE or Quarto preview, and then hit refresh in your browser. And you can see what the new format and pick one that you like. And then there's documentation. You can go even further and change colors as you like. So you can see here, this list here is all of the links that I have. So that just shows up as these links under my name. So that's pretty great. And then the rest is just text, right? I'm just have text as I'm going through. So here's my little bit of biography right here that tells you about me. And then here I used a level 2 header that says education. And so I list out my degrees, and then I have some selected projects, right? Just to have that 2-column page. If you do that, you're probably almost there, but you can easily create additional pages. So here, if you want to have a blog, right? So I kind of demonstrated this. So on this blog page, I can just have a directory with QMD files, and each one of those is a list. So I created one that has the slide decks from tonight. So you can do that. This is just going to create the listing page. But then, right, I need to remember, oh, I need to add that I want to have that up in my menu. So I have to go back to that underscore quarto.yml, right, and add projects, which is going to add that link to the upper right-hand corner. So for the specific blog post, right, I just have, some metadata that has a title, a description is optional, date is also optional, but probably nice to have. You can categorize it if you want to have a little image, right? So in the case on the index page, I have this little like stock image that I found. So I just threw that in there, and you can just kind of put everything in there. And then Quarto handles the indexing and all that kind of stuff for you automatically. Okay, so that's sort of on the back end, sort of building the site. And if you follow this a little bit, or you copy it and you do the Quarto preview, you kind of have a website on your computer, right? So, but of course we want to publish it to the web. So if you're not familiar, GitHub has this feature called GitHub Pages. So it's a special part of a portfolio. So if you've done GitHub and if you ever bothered to go into the settings, right over here on the left-hand side, we have a GitHub Pages. I hit back by mistake. So a couple of things we need to do. One is we need to change our output directory because I think the default for Quarto is to kind of generate your website into an underscore sites folder, but GitHub expects it to be in a folder called docs. So we just have to say in that QMD file, we're just going to say output dir docs. Great. The other bit, as I mentioned earlier, GitHub Pages is going to use Jekyll by default. So when you start to push something to a repo that has a Pages feature enabled, it's going to try to run Jekyll, which can sometimes cause issues. So in order to tell GitHub that we don't really want Jekyll, you just have to create a file called .no Jekyll in the root of your repository, and that tells GitHub, don't bother with Jekyll, right? We're good. So you can just create that text file in your ID and save it as .no Jekyll, or I have a couple of commands for Mac Linux users or for Windows users to create that file for you automatically. But of course, if you just decide to kind of copy this repository that I kind of set up as a template, I have that file here already. So from there, I'm not going to go into a lot of GitHub. I'm just going to throw some GitHub commands. I tend to use RStudio a lot. So RStudio has a Git, Git enabled right there. So this is up in the tab, so I can just check the files that I want to upload, click commit, and I'm good to go. If you're more of a command line person, well, you can say I can initialize a Git repo. I want to add all the files and then make my initial init. Oops. Wow, I went all the way back. Let's get... Okay, so that's great. So all I've done now is commit my files to the Git repo on my computer. So the next step is I need to publish it to GitHub. So the first thing you want to do is go to github.com/new, and you're going to click to create a new repository. So you need to give it some name. This is really the only part that's required. I generally recommend in this context, just leave everything else blank. Don't initialize a README, don't initialize a git ignore or anything like that, because we'll create those locally as we go. When you create that, at the end, it's going to give you a URL. So in my case, right, you could see it's this URL right here, and this is what I'm going to need. I would need that to copy that. And I just run this command, git remote add or origin, and then that URL. Copy your URL in, not mine. And that's going to link your local Git repo to your public GitHub repo, right? And then you can verify that it works with this git remote command. And then finally, you can just push. So in essence, what that's going to do is take everything that you've committed to your local Git repo and publish it to GitHub, right? So from there, you can go in, you can run Quarto publish GitHub pages just locally into your terminal. And that's actually going to do everything. And then you want to go to this, as I showed over here, if you go to settings, if this command worked correctly, and it did for me, I tried a couple times the first time, this command actually fills everything out here for you automatically, right? And so it's going to tell you, oh, we published to GitHub pages, and it's and here's your URL. So if I click on that URL, right, here's my website, right, on the public web. And I think if you just do that, and you just, even if you just have that one page, like this one home page that has maybe your, some kind of graphic and your name and some links to your public, things that you want to share. You can list out your education and experiences here. I think this gives you a huge leg up. You put this URL at the top of your resume, or maybe a QR code to it as well to help them get there quicker. That helps set you up a lot. I'm just going to kind of, as a side, the next advanced thing you might want to do is GitHub Pages will let you have your own domain if you want, right? So if you notice when at the beginning, I said my current like portfolio site is briar.org. It's just my last name.org. So I went to Hover. I paid the $12 or so per year to register a name. And so this is just to give you a sense. It's really not hard at all. What you need to do is just add some what are called A records and C name records. So you can just look at this and copy and paste it over. These IP addresses are the IP addresses for GitHub. So this all of this needs to be exactly the same. What would be different is like for the www here, instead of jbriar.github.io, you're going to put your GitHub username .github.io. And then, of course, I have a link to a fairly lengthy page on GitHub's site that explains how to do that. So you can just have like my name, .net or .com or whatever, and that takes it to the next level, right? It's your own domain to kind of publish yourself. Last little bit, and again, this is why I might recommend just cloning this repo. GitHub has this really cool feature where you can have code run anytime you make commits. And so they're called GitHub Actions. So if you've not played with actions, this is really, really cool. And so what I've done here is I've given you an action that all you need to do. So if I go in here and edit any file on GitHub, not even on my local computer, I can do the editing on their website and click, save or commit, like kind of on the website. It will automatically rebuild my website for me on GitHub, not even on my computer. And it's all done through this action. There's really nothing you need to do here. I just want to point out there's a lot of blocks that are commented out. So what I have is, I just have a section where it's setting up Quarto and the like. And but if you end up deciding you want to put R code or Python code, as I mentioned, you can kind of intersperse it in your documents, then you need to ensure that you have Python set up. So if you're going to use Python, just uncomment like these two lines. And this GitHub action will ensure that GitHub is set up for this to run. Because otherwise, when you get to the render site, it's going to encounter a Python code and it's not going to know what to do if Python's not there. So that's just a little side note if you want to, kind of go a little bit more advanced. And then when you go over to the GitHub Actions, you can kind of see, things that are running. In fact, I did one just 52 minutes ago as I was making some final tweaks to the slide deck. So I know this is a lot. Happy to answer questions. I got a QR code here. Let me throw probably the main thing you want to look at is if you go to this GitHub repo, this has a link to the slide deck, all the source code here to build everything. You can see here's like the index for the home page. You can see my Quarto website. And so my recommendation is just play around with this. You can have this, you make tweaks, you go over, refresh your page, see what it looks like, so forth and so on as you go through. So I'll also put a link. Well, actually, you got the repo. So from here, you can get to the website. You can get to the slides in HTML or PDF format if you wish. If there are questions, happy to answer them. But I really encourage you to take some time to do this. If nothing else, if it's just an electronic version or website version of your resume, I think as somebody who's sat on a lot of search committees, and I see a URL on the top of the resume, particularly for a technical job, that to me makes me look a little bit longer at this person. So thank you for your time and attention, and I'll answer questions.